Before we get started with tonight's forum, may I please ask you to rise for the national anthem. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm Sadiq Valiani, the chair of our local nomination committee, and along with my fellow committee members, Rick Orman, William Stevenson, and Dave Prisco, along with the support of our board, it's our pleasure to host you and our 4 approved nomination contestants this evening. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge Joan Crockett, our former member of Parliament for Calgary Centre. And I believe we have some more dignified guests who will be joining us a little bit later on tonight. When you vote in the nomination contest, on March 2nd over at the Calgary Centre, you're able to rank the contestants numerically, or you may choose to vote for only one. A winner must receive at least 50% of the votes that are cast that day. If, after the first round of counting, no one individual receives 50% or more, votes cast towards the lowest ranked candidates, or anyone who receives less than 10%, will be redistributed according to the number 2 votes. This process will continue until someone receives at least 50% of the support. I know we're all excited for me to stop talking and for our excellent candidates to start. There are just a few housekeeping items for me to address before we get started. The first one is there are bathrooms just outside the room to your left as you exit if you require them. And also just a reminder that tonight we are looking forward to a friendly and respectful evening. And we know that each of our candidates has committed to fulfilling that endeavor, but we also know that we've got campaign teams and of course supporters in the room as well. And we'd like to ask that all of you help us accomplish that goal. The rules for tonight's forum are rather quite simple. After opening remarks from each candidate, the general audience questions will be posed to the contestants by myself. Each contestant will have 90 seconds to respond. They will receive a 10-second warning by waving of a blue placard by William. And if warranted, we will extend the time or shorten it as we see fit. Members of the audience, if you'd like to submit questions, we have volunteers at the back who will now wave. Feel free to submit questions to the folks who are waving, or at the registration table where you registered on your way in tonight. The order of opening remarks has been predetermined by random draw prior to the start of tonight's forum. The candidates are seated in this very order. Starting off, we will have Tamara Loisel, followed by Greg McLean, followed by Hugh Thompson, followed by Chad Ford. Questions that are posed this evening will be asked of all candidates, and they will respond in descending order. Greg McLean will have the opportunity to answer the first question first, Hugh Thompson the second question first, Chad Ford the third question first, and Tamara Loisel. And hopefully, we'll have more than 4 questions. So, once again, on behalf of the board, thank you so much for coming today. We'll now like to pass the microphone over to Tamara Loisel. Tamara?
Canada is in trouble. The current government, led by the Justin Trudeau Liberals, has probably been the most incompetent, disorganized, corrupt, and short-sighted government probably in Canadian history. And just like his father, Justin Trudeau has shown deep hostility to Alberta and our oil and gas sector. He has fumbled the ball on major pipeline projects that could have created prosperity for us all. Just look at the damage they've inflicted in 3.5 years. Northern Gateway, rejected. Energy East, suffocated by regulatory red tape. Trans Mountain expansion, nationalized, no shovels in the ground to date. Not only has he failed to act on pipelines, Trudeau has acted to sabotage them with his anti-pipeline Bill C-69 and the oil tanker moratorium, Bill C-48. As Albertans, we are losing $80 million a day due to the price differential because we cannot get major pipelines built. Taxes have gone up, businesses have closed, families are struggling, and the trust fund Trudeau government is completely oblivious to the pain they are inflicting on Canadians and Albertans in particular. While Albertan families and businesses struggle, instead of giving us relief, guess what? Our equalization payments went up. And what did we get in return? A Quebec premier who calls our oil socially unacceptable. But our money isn't socially unacceptable. I'm a mother of 2 great children, one of which will officially be an adult in a couple of weeks. And like most parents, I worry about the next generation's economic future given Trudeau's massive deficits and his efforts to undermine our economy. Over the past year, my team and I have surveyed thousands of Calgary Centre residents about their concerns, and resoundingly, the top concern was pipelines. I have 20 years of experience at the front lines of energy issues. I've sat at the boardroom table with energy executives and at community centers on reserves with First Nations chiefs. I have a track record of getting deeply divided communities on side with pipeline projects. While others talk, I act. I've also been in this race since day one, not just the past few weeks. In the past year, I've knocked on over 15,000 doors in sun, rain, hail, -30, and snow. And I will work as hard for you in Ottawa as I have in this campaign. If you're looking for a fighter who will spend each waking minute in Ottawa fighting for you and your families, I'm your candidate.
Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody, thank you for coming out tonight. I'm Greg McLean, and I'm sure you know. This process we're going through now is our process of picking a candidate who's going to be the Conservative candidate in the next federal election. And that's an important process we're going through, because I know everybody in this room is going to vote Conservative. What we have to do here is come up with our best candidate, our best shot at actually turning this riding back into Conservative riding. It's essential because good candidates equal good government. And speaking of good government, one thing I see in real short supply right now in Ottawa is good government. You take a look at this Liberal government and their complete disdain for our #1 economic driver in this province, the oil and gas industry. Witnessed yesterday another $9 billion of assets being put on the block by an international oil and gas company that is pulling out. In effect, what we're saying is that our economy here in the oil and gas sector is macro uninvestable. And that's at a time when the oil and gas industry is prospering all around the world. Add to that what's going on with equalization payments, what this government is doing from a legalistic perspective on influence peddling, and the taxation increases we're all facing, and the overstep we have in a CO2 tax regime. It's time for change, and change is essential here going forward. Now, there's a lot to be chosen here amongst the candidates, but let's look at what we really think we're here for, and that's getting somebody that's going to take on Ken Hare in the next federal election. Ken Hare is a very good retail politician. The Liberal Party has somebody here that they have counted on before, and he is out at all the polls, all the doors, all the shopping centers, meeting people all the time. He's an experienced retail politician. We're gonna have to pull out a lot of work in order to upset this man. And that is what the polls are telling us as well. So let's do well here. We have much to accomplish in this riding. We need people with experience. We need people that can actually bring some change forward. And we need to do two things here. Find somebody that's going to beat Ken Hare in the next election, and find somebody who's going to be a good representative in Ottawa once we beat Ken Hare. And that requires experience. It requires experience in the business level, requires experience at the political level. Years ago, I worked for Harvey Andre, a great MP for this riding. And then working for Harvey for 3 years in Ottawa was a great experience. It led to a greater experience as I worked as the policy advisor Minister of Transport. We accomplished many things. We privatized parts of Via Rail, we privatized CN, and we set up local airport authorities. These are great accomplishments, getting jobs out of government into the private sector where they've all prospered, and we've done very well. Eventually that leads to lower taxation. Moving forward, I'm best known in Calgary here for my role at Cavendish Investing, where I was the Chief Investment Officer for 5 years. A lot of oil and gas investing, a lot of technology, a lot of services. It is something that stood me well, and I think it's a skill set I learned that's going to serve us well in Ottawa as we build change going forward. Ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and thank you for coming to tonight's Candidates Forum. Before I get started, I want to thank my volunteers for coming out today, but more importantly, I want to express my gratitude for the amount of hard work, time, and effort you have given. We have successfully knocked on thousands of doors together, and I know I couldn't have made it through the past year without your support. Thank you very much. My name is Hugh Thompson. I'm running for the Conservative nomination in Calgary Centre. I'm a native Calgarian, and I've lived, worked, and raised my family in Calgary Centre. I understand the issues facing Calgarians in these difficult times. As a chartered accountant, I've been the founder and builder of 5 successful oil and gas companies over the last 25 years. I'm a businessman that understands what it means to make payroll, risk and spend capital, balance budgets, and deal with regulations. I'm the only candidate in the field with these qualifications. Calgary Centre needs stronger representation in Ottawa and a member of Parliament who has experience in the energy industry. Alberta's energy industry is one of the most important drivers of the Canadian economy, and its health impacts the standard of living of every Canadian. Tax revenues from the industry provide critical funds for education, healthcare, and social programs. But Canada's energy industry is in trouble. Foreign investment in Canada has decreased from $80 billion in 2015 to $33 billion in 2017, a decrease of 59%. The main reason for this decrease is the exodus of capital from our oil and gas business. Most of this capital has basically gone south to the USA, where the oil industry is booming. You look at cities like Houston, Odessa, and Midland, and you're seeing unprecedented growth in these cities, and prosperity, and low unemployment, and record high home prices. There's no reason why Alberta should not be seeing the same growth and prosperity. Over the past 3 years, the USA has become energy self-sufficient and the world's largest producer of oil and gas. Meanwhile, in Canada, the Liberal government is trying to shut down the fossil fuel industry. They have cancelled the Energy East pipeline and the Northern Gateway pipelines, and the Trans Mountain pipeline is a debacle. The biggest hypocrisy is that Canada continues to import 800,000 barrels a day, that's 800,000 barrels a day, of foreign oil into eastern Canada, while Alberta's oil remains landlocked. There's never been a more important time for new people and new ideas in Ottawa. I'm asking for your vote in the nomination election on March 2nd. Thank you.
Feel free to applause when I pause too. Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. In particular, I'd like to thank all the volunteers who made tonight possible. I decided to join this race at the beginning of January because first, we can't accept 4 more years of Justin Trudeau. His attack on the energy industry, taxpayers, has generally divided this country like never before. We have a Prime Minister who's more focused on our differences as opposed to the shared values which bring us together. A Prime Minister is more concerned about if someone is a man or a woman, or this religion or that, as opposed to who can do the best job. I also joined this race because I was concerned about our ability to win this riding back. Kent Eyre is the #1 political fundraiser in the country for the last 2 years in a row. Polling consistently shows this riding leaning left. Provincially, we're half NDP right now. At the same time, we see the federal NDP in free fall, with Maxime Bernier's party likely to get 2 to 3% support in this riding. That splits our votes and consolidates Liberal voters. There is, however, a path to victory, but we need the right candidate, and I am that candidate. This nomination needs to be about 2 things. First, who do you want to represent you? 2, who can win this riding back? So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm born and raised in Alberta, and I went to the University of Alberta. During this time, I joined the military. I did so because I was looking for adventure, I believe in service to my country, and I wanted to make the world a better place. That hasn't changed. Since then, I've lived in this riding, working in the energy industry. 7 years ago, I founded a software company with the head of regulatory for Northern Gateway to help companies better engage with the public around major projects. Since then, our software has been used by over 500 resource development and energy projects across North America. I've also founded a nonprofit for entrepreneurs, which now has 1,600 members and is sponsored by Google. I understand both the challenges and opportunities of the energy and technology industries in Canada and Alberta. I am proud of the huge momentum we've created in my campaign, from the introductory video that's been viewed by over 30,000 people on Facebook, to the huge amount of memberships we were able to bring in such a short period of time. I believe that being a veteran, fluent in French and English, and having experience in the energy, nonprofit, and technology sectors uniquely makes me the best candidate to win this riding back. To win Calgary Centre back, we need to convince young people that conservative values around items such as fiscal responsibility and having a competitive tax structure benefits them. Young people like the ones who have joined my campaign for their first foray into politics. People like Hussam El-Ramini, Steve Palestine, and Anna Pronachiva. So I'd like to ask you all to please join us to fight for 1, reversing Justin Trudeau's attacks on the energy industry, controlling spending and cutting taxes. That means no more increases to payroll taxes, and returning fairness to income splitting and passive income taxation. And last, implementing a fair, orderly, and compassionate immigration system. Now let's talk about getting this country back on track. Thank you.
Thank you very much, especially to those who obey the time restrictions. Mr. Boyd is trying to wave his placard a little bit over there. To get things started, we've got a nice and easy question. As mentioned previously, the first response to this one will be Mr. Greg McLean. If you had an opportunity to introduce a private member's bill, what private member's bill would that be and why?
90 seconds.
Well, thank you.
90 seconds.
90 seconds. A private member's bill, and you know what the first bill I introduced about is actually part of the government in Ottawa, would be to get a regulatory process that defines what companies have to do to move projects forward in Canada. Fundamentally important that actually investment comes into this country because we're a small country. A lot of our investment capital in Canada comes for our projects from outside the country. Foreign capital is not coming into Canada because it sees a regulatory regime that is not constructive. There are hurdles every step of the way that aren't defined ahead of time. Clarity on the definition of that process is necessary for us to actually have development in this country going forward. Of course, development means jobs, jobs being developed in our resource industry, values go up, etc. That is the fundamentally most important thing at this point in our country. Thank you, Sydney.
If I had to introduce a private member's bill in the House of Commons, I guess the first thing I would look at, and this isn't energy related, would be the drug problem in Canada that's going on right now. We've got an opioid crisis and meth crisis in many cities, and our young people are dying at an incredible rate. And I think more needs to be done on this subject, and we need to facilitate the communities so that they can battle this problem, and we don't have these deaths happening on a daily basis. Thank you.
I actually think the regulatory process that existed previously worked. Northern Gateway was approved, but then was killed by the Liberal government when they came in. I think if I was talking about a private member's bill that impacted the energy industry, my focus would be on support for the federal government that they will exert their federal jurisdiction on pipelines. Because that's really the challenge, is that provincially we've abdicated that federal responsibility to provinces like British Columbia and Quebec, which have restricted our access to market. Thank you.
Similar to what Chad was just saying, I also think that's one of our biggest issues is needing to assert our federal jurisdiction pursuant to especially section 9210C of the Constitution, and invoke declaratory power and declare interprovincial pipelines in the national interest and for the general advantage of Canada. So if provincial premiers want to oppose federal projects, then they should come and run federally, because interprovincial pipelines are federal jurisdiction.
Thank you very much. Before we go into our next question, I just want to take a minute to recognize Tom Kmeech, Member of Parliament for Calgary Shepherd. I would say that in the last federal election campaign, Tom and several other Calgary members of Parliament worked hard to send resources into Calgary Centre to help our efforts. Their support today, as well as the hope that they'll be sending dollars and volunteers to try rally in the next election.
Subtle.
Always be closing.
For our next question, if you could remove any item from our policy book for our party, what would that be and why? If you could remove any item from our party's policy book, what would that be and why? Hugh Thompson.
Well, it's been a while since I read the policy book, Sadiq, but
Can't blame you for that one.
that's right. That's a tough question. I think that we need to treat our veterans with a lot more respect, and they need to be top priority. And I know in the policy book we do talk about veterans, but I would say that we need to elevate them to the status that where they're paid correct pensions, and that they're treated with respect for all the time they've served for the country, and that would be my change. Thank you.
Thanks, Hugh. My number one would be supply chain. You know, at the end of the day, we need a government that respects all the different regions. You know, our energy industry has been under complete attack, and the federal government's not looked after that. And meanwhile, we've been worried about a bunch of millionaire dairy farmers in Quebec, so that is the one that I would remove. Thank you.
Well, seems how Chad stole the one I was going to say. I got to go to option 2, which is I don't like a preferential ballot. I think first past the post, the way we elect our elected officials, it should be how we elect our candidates.
Well, I'm going to stick with Chad on this one. I think that the supply management system is an aberration that we have had to change for decades now in Canada. When the value of a license for producing something is worth more than the value of what you're actually producing, you've got a problem. We've seen it in the taxi industry, where you eventually get monumental change. We're going to see it in the supply management industry. We're going to have other producers come in and say, this no longer works. There will be disallocation going forward. Thank you.
Another really easy question for you guys. Do you believe that the People's Party of Canada is a threat to the Conservative Party of Canada? If so, why? If not, why not? And if you believe that it's a threat, what will you do about it?
Yeah, it's 100% a threat. You know, as I outlined in my speech, we think about a party that's obviously not going to win this riding, but we lost this riding by 700 votes last time. And they're going to get 2 to 3% in this riding, and that's a real concern. We've seen what it's like when parties are split along the right. We got Rachel Notley's NDP before, and now and previously we had a decade of Jean Chrétien's Liberals. So it's a real issue. I think what we have to do is be able to speak about the conservative values that we believe in and show that the Conservative Party represents those conservative values. That means, certainly the energy industry, but also talking about how it can be fiscally responsible in dealing with taxes, and also an item that we don't always do the best job about as conservatives, and that's talking about issues like immigration and identity politics that I think has gotten a lot of traction that Maxime's brought up. And we can do that in a respectful way, but talking about why we don't want to be like our Prime Minister focusing on our differences, but we can talk about the shared values that bring this country together. Thank you.
I think in principle, yes, this People's Party of Canada can pose a threat in particular ridings where it's a very thin margin. And this was one of those ridings that we did only win by less than 750 votes. However, after being on the ground for the last year and door knocking on 15,000 doors, I can tell you that the People's Party came up once. And from that perspective, I think that people in this riding see the Conservative Party of Canada as the only option to defeat Kent Hare and the Liberals.
Well, I didn't count the doors I knocked, but I saw the People's Party of Canada come up several times. And the leadership of the Conservative Party here last time, Maxime Bernier did very well because he stood for something. He stood for policies that resonated with people in Calgary and policies that we all like to talk about in politics. And he gained a lot of support from a lot of us in this room. It is going to be a threat. So I saw that, and I would say higher than Chad. I'd say sometimes 10% of those votes are going to hold their nose and say, I'm not voting for anybody unless you give me a good reason to vote for you. And Maxime Bernier is saying, I'm giving you a good reason because I stand for something. People want politicians that actually have something to say and are willing to put it on the line and say, this is what I'm going to do if you elect me. We're going to lose a handful of votes here. What are we going to do about it? We're going to make sure we run a good candidate, and we're going to make sure that candidate has a good team behind him and is well supplied and well financed, and we can win this riding by door to door. Kent Hare's at 43% in the polls right now. The Conservatives are at 45. You think we can even afford 2%? No. Let's deal with this quick.
Well, my answer is that I think the People's Party of Canada is not a significant threat in Calgary, but I think Maxime Bernier in the East, it may make some difference in some of the ridings down there. I think in the Conservatives, we've got to stick to our conservative principles on immigration and carbon tax and free enterprise. And those are the type of things that Conservatives believe in. And Max Bernier is trying to provide a wedge in there, but really, if you're a conservative-minded voter, you are going to, stick to those conservative principles, and we will defeat anybody in the People's Party with that. Thank you.
Should Canada subsidize the CBC?
hell no.
That's a record right there, 5 seconds.
Keep turning this off.
The Conservative Party of Canada, should Canada support
No,
the CPC?
the
CBC,
Canadian
sorry.
Broadcasting Corporation.
No, we look at this, what the CBC actually delivers for the $1 billion of subsidies we give it. And effectively, there are some services that a lot of people in this room, I'm sure, listen to on CBC. There is a competitive part of CBC where they're competing against other people, and they should compete on a level playing field. There is also service that CBC delivers across the world and across Canada in remote areas where there is no other alternative. And we need to continue to subsidize that to some extent. Thank you.
When the CBC was first created years ago, it was created to bring media to remote locations that couldn't otherwise get radio or TV. But now in the internet age and with satellite TV, I don't think the CBC should be funded to that level because they are competing against the other media sources. And it's unfair that a crown corporation that should be able to compete against those and actually expand its website presence and internet presence at our expense. So I think it should be cut back.
I'm going to actually expand my answer to talk about all the subsidization of the media that's going on right now. And I think that's a huge problem we're having. CBC is one case of that, but the $600 million bribe that the Liberals gave the broadcasters across the country is a major problem. The CBC hasn't been able to is moving against the disruptive and innovative solutions that are coming out that Hugh talked about. At the end of the day, I believe that the media has been very focused between Toronto and Montreal and hasn't done a good job of representing the rest of the country. So I think we have to look very seriously at all these subsidies, removing them, and also looking at, is there really a future for CBC in Canada? Thank you.
Canada's relationship with China is complex. How would you approach this relationship? Canada's relationship with China is complex. How would you approach this relationship?
Well, China's an emerging world power. There's China and there's the US now as your two biggest world powers. And we hurt ourselves by being only beholden to one of those world powers. However, there's a value test here as well because Americans align more closely with our values than the current Chinese regime. Is the Chinese regime growing out of that issue they have? And the answer at this point in time, I think, is a pretty clear no. We've got to say, what is the Chinese government doing at this point in time to cut back on CO2 emissions, which is the real world problem on CO2? What is the Chinese government doing for labor standards? And we're competing with these people, and we're supplying, we're buying goods that are supplied by China repetitively. These are things that we need to address in a trade agreement with them where we have a level playing field going forward, but on a more moralistic basis, we have to look at what their interests are in the world and what our interests are in the world. And if those interests are at direct odds with each other, we need to be able to say, this is where we differ from you, and this is why, and this is where we're going to stand on these issues. Huawei, for an example, we need to understand what exactly is the problem with Huawei. Is it not part of the Five Eyes, so there's other governments that will not allow Huawei into the country? We do, and there's a difference. We have to figure out what that is and come to a conclusion. Thank you.
Well, I think in dealing with China, it really comes down to communication, and that communication should be done more on a grassroots level through the communities, through the Hong Kong Canada Business Association, some of the other Chinese trades groups, and we need the correct people that understand, the Chinese understand the language and the people, and have a dialogue with them on that level that we can bring to a more national level. It's the people on the ground here, and I've met many Chinese people in Calgary Centre here, and many businessmen from Hong Kong, and there's great ideas here for trade and growth in this area. But I just don't think we can tackle it, the way Trudeau's handling it, and the people he's sending over to negotiate, I just don't think they're effective.
I have another word. Instead of ineffective, I'd say embarrassing. I think that Justin Trudeau, maybe what's embarrassed me the most is how he's represented our country internationally. I don't know how he's been able to, in 3 years, get the 2 largest economies in the world both angry at us. We're a natural geographic bridge between the US and China, and we should be benefiting from both. It's an embarrassment that we're not selling our oil and gas to China. We absolutely should be. At the same time, we as the government need to say, our international policy is based on representing Canadians first. And that means we only make deals that help Canadians first. So thank you very much.
Well, I understand that Stephen Harper now works for Denton's in the area of foreign relations, so perhaps we could bring Harper in and send a trade mission over to China and start having some constructive dialogue. I do think another point that is really important to keep in mind when we're dealing with countries like China, countries that violate basic human rights, I'm not sure that those should be total free trade countries that we trade with. Already I have a problem with the fact that Quebec brings in oil from Saudi Arabia, a country that does not respect basic human rights, and yet they don't take Alberta oil. And the same applies to China, so they should not have free trade when they don't respect basic human rights.
Nous avons 2 langues officielles au Canada. Pensez-vous qu'il est important pour les Canadiens de communiquer dans les 2 langues? Nous avons 2 langues officielles au Canada. Pensez-vous qu'il est important que les Canadiens de communiquer dans les 2 langues? We have 2 official languages here in Canada. Do you believe that it is important for candidates to be able to communicate in both languages?
I respect that we have 2 languages in Canada. I've lived in Alberta all my life, and my son is actually bilingual. I am not bilingual. I think the imposition of the bilingual system on the people of Alberta is maybe too much sometimes, but I do believe that we should respect both languages, and I said my son is fluent in French, and so he could be my translator.
C'est important, mais c'est pas essentiel. The bottom line is it's important, but it's not essential. I actually think that often the 2 official languages has hurt Albertans. When we look at people that are appointed to courts, when we look at public sector, often it's benefited provinces that have much more built-in bilingualism. That being said, learning another language is important, and I think it's great to know a second language. And I can guarantee you, if I get elected, I'll be going to Quebec and telling them we're building our damn pipelines.
Oui, c'est very important. I do think it's important to respect both official languages and to have basic fluency. That doesn't mean to get the job you have to be already fluent. I mean, the government does provide training for members of parliament and people that are in that role to learn both official languages, because to be in the House of Commons you are interacting with people from both official languages on a daily basis, and I certainly think that is important and would welcome that. I do come from a family that does have some French heritage and have taken French and look on expanding upon that so I can gain fluency.
Pour moi, c'est pas la plus importante chose pour nous à Calgary Centre, mais pour la communication aux autres députés à Ottawa, je pense que c'est très important pour communiquer l'agenda des pipelines à Québec aussi, parce que les gens de Québec, quelqu'un de Québec ne parle pas anglais. So, you have to be able to speak to people in their language in order for them to understand where you're coming from your part of the country. Not essential, but it will prove to be an advantage.
Aujourd'hui, nous avons... Just kidding, just kidding. A question posed from the audience. One of our audience members today is rather disappointed with the lack of members here who are under 35. What makes you the best candidate to win over Kent Hare and those who are under 35? Maybe not Kent's vote directly, but through him.
I think that's a great point. We actually have one of the youngest ridings in the province, and the youth vote will be essential to winning this. I think my experience in the energy industry, but also in the technology industry, is a big advantage. 2 years ago, I started a nonprofit in town called Startup Grind Calgary. We're sponsored by Google. We do monthly events where we interview successful entrepreneurs, and we average about 120 people there per event. And the average demographic there is under 30. And I think when we talk about conservative values to those people, what really matters is, if you look at the youth now, they're often self-employed, freelancers, on contracts. And I think when you're doing your own payroll, you really start noticing the difference the tax is making. And while it might have seemed, while the Liberals might have seemed like a nice alternative last election, I think we have to articulate to them why we are the party that is accepting and can also make their lives better. Thank you.
I actually have a few millennials on my team calling tonight as we're all here, and I actually brought a millennial with me. And some of the issues that millennials care about are things like the environment, in addition to the economy. And my background, as much as I focus on pipelines and I promote pipelines as the most environmentally friendly way, I'm also versed in the world of environmental language. I have a background in environmental science. And because I'm able to talk to them about that and talk to them in a knowledgeable way about why pipelines are the most environmentally friendly way to transport our oil and gas, and talk to them about how we can mitigate environmental impacts, being able to have a reasonable conversation about environmental issues with millennials makes a very, very big difference. And that is something that I can bring that matters to millennials.
It's exactly the right question. Millennials will be the largest voting bloc in this election for the first time. It'll eclipse baby boomers. We need to have a message that is very clear to them that the issues that matter to them are issues that matter to us. So that embracing of what's important to them better come across in everything we do. Number one that we kind of miss a little on this one is the environment. Our party better come up with an environmental policy here that works for the next generation, because they're all looking at it, they've all learned through their entire school that this is something that needs to be paid attention to. We have a good solution for the environment. Getting that solution well known throughout the millennial generation is something that has to happen very quickly. There's all kinds of communication mechanisms that millennials are familiar with that people that are somewhat older aren't so familiar with, and that's for a reason. I mean, people like to transcribe across different communication mechanisms as they differentiate themselves. That's going to continue. Let's make sure we embrace those as communication tools going forward, and we can reach all the people that we need to reach in this election. Thank you.
I can see just by looking out at the crowd here that there is not a lot of young people in the crowd tonight, and most politically active people in this riding are generally of a higher age. I think we have to do a better job of getting the young people involved in politics, and I think that for the most part they're a little bit jaded, and because of the job situation, and that they can't really participate in the economy. So I think we have to do a better job of getting them involved in the economy, providing jobs to them, and so that they can participate in the economy and become part of the political structure. I think you have to use social media to do that and reach out to them, but the most important thing is jobs for these young people. Thank you.
It's been mentioned tonight that the last election was lost with less than 1% of the vote. Are you the right person to beat Kent Hare? If so, why and how? Who started the last question? Yes, Chad. Tamara, it's your turn. It has been mentioned that the last federal election here in Calgary Centre was lost with less than 1% of the vote. Can you beat Kent Hare? If so, why and how?
Yeah, we know that the Conservatives lost this seat by less than 750 votes, so with less than 1%. And yeah, I do think I can beat Kent Hare, and I can bring over a lot of the people that are moderates, a lot of people that are even traditionally liberal and have liberal values. One, they've had enough of the Liberals and have seen how destructive they've been to Calgary and Calgary Centre in particular. And two, I stand for a lot of things that people that are moderates resonate with. You know, this riding is full of millennials who are very socially progressive, and as conservatives, I'm fiscally conservative, but socially moderate, socially progressive. I have this environment background. I teach at a university, so I'm around millennials all the time, and I think that's the key, is making sure we stay socially moderate and reach out and talk to them about things that matter to them, things like the environment, while we grow our economy.
Wow, it's a loaded question, because you shouldn't be up at this table if you don't think you can beat Kent Hare in the next election. But in order to do that, as I said, it's a very close race. We're going to need everybody's support. So at the end of this session, all four of these candidates are going to pull their teams together and make sure we all work together in that effort. We did lose the last election by less than 1%, 700 and change votes. A lot of reasons we lost that election, and one of them was we were pushing people away from this party. And Tamara's right. There's all kinds of people that didn't vote Conservative last time because of a perception we weren't embracing them and their differences that they have with us. So and when I say us, I talk about us three over here. Middle-aged white men, if you call us that. The real embracement of people of different cultures, people of different ethnicities, people of different sexualities, we've got to make sure that that tent is wide open for everybody here. And anybody that opposes that is just going to lose its votes in the election going forward. So let's stick to that open tent. Let's make sure we invite everybody to this party, and let's win this riding going forward.
Well, one thing I heard while I was knocking on doors over the last year was that Kent Hare really has not represented the people of Calgary Centre very well. You look at his record of voting in the House, he has voted down every pipeline motion. He has never put forward a motion that would help Calgary in any way whatsoever. And the other thing I heard is that we need a member of parliament in Ottawa that understands the energy industry. Kent Hare does not understand the energy industry. He's a lawyer. He's never worked a day in the oil industry. He does not know what's going on in Calgary and what's going on in downtown Calgary as far as the energy industry is concerned. And I think that people are going to wake up to the fact that Kent Hare is not the right candidate, and we will defeat him. Thank you.
I will beat Kent Hare. Being a veteran, having experience in the energy and technology industries, I can talk to a broad group of people that are out there. You know, I don't think we lost this last election because of having conservative values. When I think about what happened is, there was no Trudeau mania. There was some Harper fatigue that occurred. There was a bunch of foreign funding that flooded into this riding and helped defeat us. I think that, articulating our conservative values proudly with a lot of enthusiasm and having a hard work ethic will win this back. I've started a company from scratch. I've started a nonprofit from scratch. You better believe I have the effort to get this done. Thank you.
Do you believe the purchase of the Trans Mountain Pipeline was the correct move by the Liberal government?
Absolutely, yes. I think everybody has to realize is that the Trans Mountain Pipeline was its last legs. I think that we're ready for an NAFTA suit it from Kinder Morgan saying you've put too many hurdles in here that weren't there to begin with. So a lawsuit from a foreign corporation coming in and saying you have a regime in this country that is penalizing foreign capital, even though we're going through all your regulatory hurdles, in the end we're getting nowhere. So we're losing money hand over fist. We're not taking this. And that coming from it as a NAFTA challenge would have been pretty sore for the federal government to take on at that point in time. In essence, we were fortunate. I'm not sure we paid the right price. Nevertheless, the government had to be there at that point in time, or else. The travesty of this is we paid $4.5 billion for something that we overpaid for because we're actually paying for a lot of the expansion. That expansion has not occurred and doesn't have a line of sight on when it's going to occur. So Canadian taxpayers are on the line here for a whole bunch of nothing at this point in time.
Do you believe the purchase of the Trans Mountain Pipeline by the federal Liberal government was the right decision?
Absolutely not. It sends the wrong message to industry. We're forcing away investment dollars. Nobody asked for the money from the federal government. We are looking at a free enterprise system. When you push Kinder Morgan away, you're going to push a bunch more people away, and we just can't. The foreign investment has dropped from $80 billion in 2015 to $33 billion in 2017, and this is one of the main reasons. So no, I said it sends the wrong message, and we should not be federalizing these projects. We should let the free enterprise system work the way it's supposed to, and build these pipelines themselves. Thank you.
It was a national embarrassment that we had to pay that for a pipeline. That pipeline had a regulatory process that was clear and should have been, that could have easily been achieved. You know, I worked on Trans Mountain. Our software was used to process all the mutual benefit agreements with First Nations along that route. Over 80% of First Nations supported that project. We look at Northern Gateway, that was approved, killed by the Liberal government. We look at Trans Mountain, it was fumbled and lost by the federal government. What happened on that application was the courts ruled that First Nation consultation was failed by the government, not by the company. The company did adequate consultation, but Justin Trudeau, when he came in, and his instructions were to the regulator, your job is to listen, not to discuss with First Nations consultation. The courts ruled that's not adequate consultation. So if we look at every one of these pipelines, they're failures of the federal government that occurred here. We should have absolutely had this pipeline built, and we should be on our third pipeline right now. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with you and Chad on this one, that this should not have been a $4.5 billion purchase from our government. We're conservatives. We believe in free enterprise, not nationalization. This isn't Venezuela. And the price tag, it was grossly overpriced. When you look at what Trans Mountain had into the project, and a private company, Kinder Morgan didn't say, hey, we're out, buy us or we're out. We had a private sector company paying for this, doing this. What the government needed to do was take the roadblocks out of the way, have a clean and efficient regulatory process, not increasing the hurdles for them.
So this one might be a little bit more challenging. What is your position on equalization payments? What is your position on equalization payments?
Well, the equalization payment system right now is completely unfair. Since 1961, Alberta has contributed $611 billion to the equalization program, while at the same time, Quebec has received $476 billion of that. Does that sound fair? To put it in perspective, Albertans pay an average of $5,300 per person annually into the equalization system, while provinces like BC and Ontario pay $1,200 per person. We pay 4 times as much as BC and Ontario. Are we that much farther ahead? I don't think so. We have to renegotiate this agreement. Thank you.
That was a answer, and I honestly don't have a lot to add to that. We think about in general in this country, and there's been a wealth of redistribution that I don't agree with. It happens on a lot of levels. Some of it's through equalization payments, some of it's through prioritizing public sector jobs in other provinces. Some of it is simply, corruption when we see how projects are being approved. In the West, not being approved. In Quebec, out of the way. I would 100% agree with you, Hugh. The equalization program should be relooked at and should be made more fair for all Canadians.
So the equalization program was created in the 1950s to make sure there was a basic level of services available to Canadians right across the country. It was meant to recognize that occasionally in our national life, there will be times where a province is going through a tough time, and that in those times, Canadians in other part of the country will lend a helping hand. And most Canadians agree with that. We are kind and generous people. But the truth is that the equalization program is no longer about equality and fairness. It has become about pandering to parts of the country where politicians can get the most votes. It's time for us to have a national conversation about the equalization program. Albertans in particular pay billions of dollars every year to fund lavish social programs in other parts of the country. And what do we get in return? Quebec's premier says our dirty oil is not socially acceptable. So this is the height of hypocrisy. They are happy to criticize our energy sector, the same energy sector that pays these billion-dollar checks. So I love Canada, but unfair programs like this stoke a really deep sense of resentment and threaten our national unity and are stoking the flames of Western alienation.
Excellent answers. The equalization formula has been jimmied around a handful of times in the last couple of decades, including twice under the Harper government. So the formula we use on that is perspective to the government in power at the time. There's no negotiation that goes on between the provinces and the federal government. It's actually the federal government and the representatives of the federal government that come to the formula about what we're going to use. And Prime Minister Harper took a hit on the head with it, with losing all the votes in the Maritimes because of the way he applied the formula that was somewhat prejudicial to the resource industry in Newfoundland at the time. There is some complexity in it, so we don't want to go into what the numerator is and what the denominator is, but this is changeable. It is not constitutional that we have to give $17 billion a year from Alberta to social services in the rest of the country. It is actually something that gets decided by the cabinet at each term. So the fact that Justin Trudeau renewed the last equalization agreement in this term when Alberta is suffering as it is economically and employment-wise is a travesty. When Stephen Harper came up with that formula, we were prospering, so it was a bit of a blink of an eye. We didn't mind transferring a lot of money. However, we're not doing that now. Now we're transferring funds to the rest of Canada when we are at record unemployment levels for decades here in Alberta, and we have a lot of social programs that are running us a deficit. It is unfair, and it needs to be addressed.
Is our immigration system broken? And if so, how will you work to fix it? Is our immigration system broken? And if so, how will you work to fix it?
It's not broken, but it needs work. We want a fair, orderly, and compassionate immigration system. And that means two things. It means, one, that people that are legally coming into this country, there's a lot we can do to streamline and digitalize that process. One of my volunteers, who's Sam El Ramini at the back actually right now, he's an entrepreneur in town, and I've worked with him as he's had a lot of challenges with the immigration system, the complexity of it. One of the things that bothers me is you almost have to hire a lawyer or consultant to get through, and that creates a bit of a two-tiered immigration system that's not fair for people coming into this country. The second thing is, though, illegal immigration needs to be dealt with quickly and efficiently. Right now in Toronto, 40% of homeless shelters are filled with refugees from the United States of America, the richest country in the world. That makes a travesty of the system, and the fact that this Liberal government won't admit that there's a problem with that is a major issue. So I would say it's not broken, but it does definitely need some work.
compassionate people, and when it comes to our immigration system, we're all, only 2, 3, at most 4 generations away from being immigrants ourselves. So we all understand that immigration is a foundation of our society, but most of us agree that there needs to be a proper vetting process and making sure that we are attracting people that can come here and contribute to our society in addition to them fulfilling their dreams.
One of the benefits, again, of knocking doors all summer is you do get to meet some new Canadians. And those new Canadians have gone through a defined process. Spent 6 years sometimes, 8 years sometimes, and thousands of dollars because they actually walk you through the multi-steps in the process you have to go through in order to become a permanent resident and then a legal Canadian citizen. And I was lucky to attend a friend's partner's immigration ceremony earlier this year, and it was moving. When people become Canadian citizens, they are very proud. And we welcome them with open arms. They see this hole in the process that has been designed by this government as a travesty because they've gone through a process that's defined and very, very onerous. And they see this as a backdoor. The problem with this backdoor is it's also causing a lot of extra expenses to our immigration system and our immigration refugee committee because we actually have a longer process now to go through with so many people in the backlog. As we say in my business, we follow the money. Who's making all the extra money that the government has to allocate to this? And where's it coming from? Well, I'll tell you where it's coming from. It's coming from our pockets, but we're also not getting those immigrants, especially refugees, into the queue and into settled Canadian jobs that would benefit this economy. And that's what the crime is.
We need an immigration policy that Canadians understand. Right now, we have a system where people are coming across the border with no screening, and we're accepting them. Now, there's a loophole here where if these refugees show up at the border crossing, an official border crossing, they will be turned back immediately to the States. But if you come across a crossing that is not monitored, a farmer's field or a road that's not monitored, you are taken in as a refugee by the RCMP and you are provided with all the services that we can provide. This loophole has to be shut down. Immigration has to be orderly, and it has to be for the people who have waited in line and filed their paperwork properly, and we've vetted them. The Liberals are doing nothing. They want an open border policy, and they're letting people get around this, and it's not fair. Thank you.
The diversification of the Canadian economy. Canada is largely a resource-driven economy. This particular question submitter believes that everything else flows from there. With the potential of existing industries diminishing, what would you do to promote areas to diversify our economy? The diversification of our economy. Canada is largely a resource-driven economy. Everything else flows from there. With the potential of existing industries diminishing, what would you do to promote the diversification of our economy?
Well, I think the government has lots of tools in their toolbox to promote diversification in certain areas. So whether I'm a conservative, so I like free enterprise, I like market forces. And on that front, I think when it comes to things like oil and gas, we should have the market decide when we phase out or change or whatever our mix of fuels, and not government regulation. But what government has at its disposal, things like tax incentives, tax credits, and those are the types of things. Also funding innovation in certain sectors. And having a long-term plan. When you plan out the sectors that you think you have the ability to succeed in, you also have to make sure you have all the different planks that will feed into that, including skills and education training. So it's a long-term plan when you're looking at diversification.
Well, I used to run a large investment fund here in Calgary, a lot of venture capital in that. The issue with venture capital, while we backed away from it in Alberta, was because the Alberta government stepped in on our toes as far as what we were investing. The number one thing you need to diversify economies, number one, an economic base you can grow from. Take one step out from there. For instance, oil and gas, what's the number one service you can diversify from oil and gas? Environmental services. Nobody ever did that. The Alberta government was right in actually stepping out into agricultural value added, but when it became all things to all people and its diversification strategy, it lost its focus. Always focus on what your strengths are and build communities, and that will foster jobs. We can always grow our economy and then spread across industries. For instance, an environmental industry in Alberta could have been applied to the mining industry, the forestry industry, all kinds of industries that would have prospered around the world. That's the secret to economic diversification. Throwing money at the wall, either as tax incentive credits or direct money, is never a solution because it always disappears very quickly. The number one solution, of course, is capital. What's happening in this government? Capital investment is leaving this country by the billions.
Well, there's certainly no question that Calgary needs diversification. We can't be 100% dependent on the oil and gas business forever. We have a highly educated population, engineers, accountants, professionals that can adapt to new technology, and we certainly have the office space here. There's no question about that. But I think that we have a great entrepreneurial spirit in Alberta. That's been proven by the junior oil and gas sector, which was so vibrant for 25 years. And these same people can help diversify the economy. We just have to have some form of incentive or help to get this diversification done. It's got to come from the provincial and federal level, but so far I've seen nothing come up yet.
This is an issue I think a lot about. Running a startup, but also involved in the energy industry, being involved in the startup scene in Calgary. There's a couple key takeaways I'll take. One, I'm very proud of the success of our energy industry. And I don't think that we should look at, the economy as a pie that can be split up, but it's a pie that can be grown. So I think we look at how we grow off the existing fantastic industries we do have. Second thing is, I totally agree with you on the entrepreneurial spirit. Opening up the entrepreneurial spirit isn't about using the political toolbox, because politicians tend to focus on who they want to win. You look in Calgary right now, and there's this slush fund that the city's been using to give money to so-called startups that they want. And really, what they're focusing on is companies that they politically like because they, see a vision in it. They want essentially Facebook to come to Calgary, just like the Amazon bid. And I think that's a huge mistake. How we diversify the economy is we lower the tax system and we open it up to entrepreneurs to decide what the best industries are. A great example was actually Dallas in the 1990s. When they diversified their economy, they became the video game capital of the world in the early 90s. And they did that because they had a strong economy, which led to a great city, and then they had a competitive tax environment that brought these companies over. I look at Vancouver. It's too expensive to live there. I think that we should be attracting these people back here to diversify our economy with a competitive tax environment.
For our last question, we will extend the time to 2 minutes. If you are elected a member of Parliament for Calgary Centre, and yet we do not receive, if you are elected as a member of Parliament for Calgary Centre, and there is not a Conservative majority government or minority government, what will you do to represent the residents of Calgary Centre from across the aisle of government? If you are elected as a member of Parliament for Calgary Centre, and the Conservatives do not win a majority or minority government, what will you do to represent constituents and residents from across the aisle of government?
Thank you, Steve. The parliamentary system functioned in Canada for a century before we started becoming very partisan in our approach in this. Every parliamentarian should be working across the aisle with committees, with people from all different parties, the respect for other people's positions has to be brought forward. And just because you're voting differently on a different issue, because you have a different point of view, doesn't mean you're enemies. At the end of the day here, our job is to build a better Canada. And that better Canada includes the interests of Calgary and Calgary Centre's residents. Us representing our interests here economically, environmentally, with respect to our biggest industry, needs to be understood by people, not just in the Conservative Party, but in the NDP Party and in the Liberal Party, but why this is important and why we need to work together with all our industries across Canada and everybody in Parliament.
Well, if the Liberals regain a majority, it's not going to be a pleasant experience, that's for sure. As a member of the official opposition, I roll up my sleeves and work with the committees, work at the House level, and I'd use my experience to educate other MPs in Ottawa and about the energy industry and really what happens out here in Calgary and what goes on in the offices in downtown Calgary. And I just don't think the people understand that down there, and they're very short-sighted, but it's something that's going to have to be passed on to them, and it's just going to take a lot of hard work, and maybe this will help get some of these pipelines built, but I'm really hoping that we don't end up as the official opposition. Thank you.
Sorry, City, just a point of clarification, as we have 2 minutes for this, is this our final comments?
No, you will still have final comments.
Okay, so I'm going to 100% agree with you. That's as applauding. If the Liberals win, I really am worried for this country. You know, one of the reasons why we talk about the partisanship we have is the identity politics that this Prime Minister has personified, focusing on how our differences are and not looking at the shared values we have as Canadians. So that's certainly one thing I think we can focus on. Another point I just want to bring up that I thought was really good points that Tamara and Greg brought up around the environment is I think we can do a better job of educating Eastern Canada on the advantages of the energy sector when it comes to the environment. I think the strongest thing we can have to help the environment is a strong energy industry. First, getting our natural gas to China to replace their coal is an essential first step if we're serious about dealing with climate change. Beyond that, however, I think we need to look at, you know, in Canada, we produce the most environmentally, socially responsible, safest oil in the world. That is scalable around the world. You know, there was a recent study that came out that said if all nations adopted Canadian standards for oil and gas production, the average GHG emissions per barrel of oil would drop 23%. Coming from the startup world, those are things that I care about, scalability, not something like a carbon tax that is a finite fix. So those are things I think we can talk to on both sides of the aisle. Thank you.
So if the Conservatives weren't in power, but I was the member of Parliament here, one of the things that I think should be of interest to every Canadian is the influence of foreign funding in our elections. And I think, you know, Vivian Krause has started doing some really interesting work at identifying how foreign foundations have been interfering in our domestic politics, how American foundations like the Tide Foundations, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Oak Foundation have been pouring millions of dollars to fund professional activists and local groups to obstruct pipelines and landlock our resources. You know, some of the money that has been used to fund litigation and professional activists posing as locals. And these activists have tied up and delayed our regulatory process by abusing our National Energy Board system. And let's be clear, this money is not Canadian, these foundations are not Canadian, and the people do not have Canadians' interests at heart. In the last federal election, an organization called Lead Now deployed this foreign money to strategically target 29 federal ridings to help elect anti-pipeline politicians. And yes, Calgary Centre was one of those ridings, and their recommended candidate was Kent Hare. We need to stop foreign money from influencing our domestic politics, and we need to make sure that our politicians speak for Canada's national interest.
as Chad has pointed out, we have promised candidates 2 minutes for closing remarks. We will go in the reverse order from our opening remarks, starting with Chad, then Hugh, then Greg, and then Tamira. Chad?
Thank you very much. I just want to reiterate, thank you very much for hosting this, Sadiq. It's been fantastic. Thank you for William for helping out and all the volunteers who made tonight possible. I decided to run in January for 2 key reasons. One, I really do worry if Justin Trudeau wins again. I think we've all outlined the risk to the country if the Liberals are able to regain the seat. The second, however, is that I worry about our ability to win this riding back. I outlined in my earlier speech some of the concerns I had about, Canter fundraising and such. But beyond that, I joined in January because in March I signed everyone's nomination papers because I think they'd all be fine members of Parliament, and I stand by that right now. But the nomination was open for almost 10 months. It was open for 10 months because the federal party didn't call this nomination. The federal party calls a nomination when they think that there's momentum in the riding. In fact, I'd actually say that if we look at critical battleground ridings, Calgary Centre is the only chance Liberals have right now in Southern Alberta. We stand alone as a riding that didn't have a nomination called. So in January, I decided to get involved, and I'm so excited by the momentum we've had here. I will work for you to win this riding back 100%. I think the momentum we had, the fact that I joined, and a week later the nomination was called, shows the type of momentum that we brought to this race. I think the fact that our social media has been so explosive, over 30,000 views of our Facebook video. The fact that we were able to sign up the amount of members we did in a short period of time shows that I've got the toughness, energy, and grit to get this riding back. Thank you very much.
Before I start my opening comments, I just want to acknowledge my mother and father are here tonight to support me. Joe and John Thompson. My father, John, is a former member of Parliament in Calgary South. I am the candidate who can provide stronger representation in Ottawa and will be your member of Parliament that will stand up for the residents of Calgary Centre. I stand for less government, lower taxes, and free enterprise. I'm experienced in the energy industry. When I was growing up, my summer jobs were spent on the drilling rigs and the service rigs. This is where I learned the field side of the business and the hard work, obstacles, and risks involved. After I graduated from university, I spent 5 years articling for my CA, auditing many oil and gas companies in Calgary. This is where I learned the financial side of the business. Then I went on to work in the junior oil and gas sector for 25 years, where I participated in the drilling of over 100 wells and employed hundreds of people. This is where I learned about entrepreneurship, risk-taking, and dealing with regulations. I have a proven track record of dealing with stakeholders, regulators, staff, and shareholders. I will use this experience to lead the charge in caucus for the reform of energy policies that will benefit all Canadians. Thank you. My father went to Ottawa from 1978 to 1984 to oppose Pierre Trudeau and the National Energy Program, which had devastating effects on the Alberta economy. Now in 2019, we have Justin Trudeau and his equally crippling energy policies that are hurting not just this city and the province, but the whole of Canada. I am dedicated to representing the people of Calgary Centre and Ottawa and bringing positive change for our energy industry. Please support me in the upcoming nomination election. Thank you.
Allow me. Sadiq, the committee that organizes today, thank you very much. And thank you to all those volunteers that have committed to this process. Your activities in getting us all through this process, including on voting day on March 2nd, is fundamental, and your input is a part of civic democracy. Thank you very much. I started knocking doors here in April. 10 months of getting to know a lot of you, and there's been a lot of really good conversations at your door. The best part about that, frankly, is that I've knocked doors for politicians before, but knocking doors this time, people had a lot to say. So the doors were welcoming. People invited me in and said, this is what's wrong, and this is what's wrong, and this is what's wrong. And how many times you heard that about 3 levels of government that was getting it wrong at this point in time? I'm happy to hear that. You all had a lot in your mind, and I was able to share a lot, and that required a lot of time, I think, just to get through that process. But I've heard what you're looking for in a candidate as well. You're looking for integrity and character. You're looking for experience and ability. And you're looking for work ethic and winnability. Winnability here is very important because we do need, step one, to get past this hurdle. This riding was only Liberal in 1968 to 1972 before this current period. This is not a Liberal riding. We need to turn it back into Conservative riding. I have a lot of experience in politics. When I was the president of this riding association, we were one of the best financed riding associations in Canada. We helped finance campaigns across Canada because we raised so much money here. We need to do that again. You know, I've got experience getting things done in Ottawa. You know, I speak a little bit of French that should get me through in Ottawa, and you know I've got the ability to get this done. I'm committed to winning here. I'm committed to serving you, and I'll earn every one of your votes. Thank you. Please support me.
I know many of you are angry about the distressed economic state of Calgary and Alberta, and so am I. How our oil and gas sector is being dismantled one step at a time from this Trudeau government. From canceling the Northern Gateway project, tabling Bill C-48, the oil tanker moratorium, and Bill C-69, the anti-pipeline bill. The carbon tax, providing federal funds to anti-pipeline protesters. All of these actions by the current federal government are choking the life out of our province's most economically significant industry. We are now at a point of economic crisis here in Alberta because we cannot get a major pipeline built. I am running to be your Conservative candidate and Member of Parliament because I know from my private sector experience that I can help get pipelines to the finish line. The biggest barriers to getting our pipelines built have been environmental concerns and Indigenous opposition. I have spent most of my 20-year career on the front lines of these issues, solving problems between energy companies, environmental issues, and our First Nations. I have a track record for getting deeply divided communities on side with pipeline projects. We need to be doing this work at a national level, but we are not, and it is costing us billions and holding our economy back. There are not many people in this country that have that kind of experience. I am the only candidate here that can break through those barriers and get pipelines to the finish line. We lost this riding last time by less than 750 votes. Justin Trudeau and the Liberals clearly do not care about Calgary or Alberta, and I think they treat us like second-class citizens. But let's not forget that no matter what, this is Canada and this is our country. From door knocking on over 15,000 doors over the last year, I know we can win this riding back and beat Kent Hare and the Liberals. If you want to see me in Ottawa fighting for you, then I need your support to get there. I am asking for your vote on March 2nd.
Thank you very much. And on the note of March 2nd, just as a friendly reminder, the nomination vote will take place from 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. at the Kirby Centre downtown, just off of 7th Avenue. There's plenty of parking, and if our candidates here are smart, they'll have some coffee and donuts to welcome you as you arrive. We'd also like to acknowledge two additional guests that we have with us here tonight. We have the former member of the Legislative Assembly, Christine Cusinelli for Calgary Prairie. And we have Nick Milliken at the back there, the current United Conservative Party contestant for Calgary Prairie as well. Our EDA's CFO would be a little upset if I didn't also mention that once the provincial election is done, we're really looking forward to support of all of our provincial brothers and sisters to help us get Calgary Centre across with financial donations and volunteering as well. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take a quick minute to thank each and every one of you. I think it's fair to say tonight's forum was a resounding success, and it could not have been done, of course, without our 4 approved candidates, as well as your attendance and participation tonight, and of course your questions. So thank you very much for coming out. I hope our candidates will be sticking around. I think 1 or 2 of them may be providing some hospitality tonight as well, but I'll leave that up to their campaign teams to communicate. And I do wish each of you a good night. Thank you.